I mean, painting, why is it getting 43% of all the complaints? Primarily because it's a finishing trade, it's what everyone sees. No one sees how good the frames are, no one sees how good the plumbing is, it's normally all hidden. When you look at defects and painting, it's attention to detail. That's the difference, and so it's out there for everyone to see. And attention to detail is affected by lots of variations. It can be environmental weather, but it can be environmental conditions of how people are working and when they're working. The master painters, we get quite a lot of people ringing to come out and look at jobs, and we have inspectors that do that as well. Often it can be a situation where painters have underquoted work, and so there's a lot of time and pressure to get jobs done. So that they can make a profit, or the fact is things can go wrong. So there's a whole host of reasons, but primarily it's either poor preparation or not enough time or not enough inspection at the end of the job. So there is a standard, and basically a paint is defective if it doesn't comply with the manufacturer's instructions, and that's a critical point there. Manufacturer's instructions come to play a lot, as well as the Australian standard. Now, the Australian standard is a guide, but it's a minimum guide. So it doesn't mean that you can't do more or you can't do better or your client's not expecting more. So it's about understanding those types of things. Just something about the slides, I suggest you read them. They are verbatim within line of the standard. I'll just generalise and talk a little bit about things. So I won't be reading what's on the slide. You may need to do that yourselves. So how do we check out whether a defect is right or wrong? Okay, so the first thing you need to understand is that you need to look at it from about 1.5 to 2 metres back, straight on, in normal lighting conditions. So under the Australian standard, that means that you can't run around with one of these little beasts with your face up against the wall or 600 mil off. Despite what the block shows you, that's not how it's done. Have we got it working? Oh, that's all right. Okay, it went dead, but that's okay. However, when you are working for builders, or when builders are specifying jobs, it comes down to what's in the contract. And sometimes your contracts will read to the satisfaction of the supervisor. So that means that the supervisor can run around with one of those and a light and look at it under those conditions. So you need to check contracts and make sure that that's working fine for you. But a light is not the way that the Australian standard does it, nor is glancing light. And I mean, that's one of the issues which tend to highlight defects, is glancing light. Now, a lot of things with glancing light can be avoided, but it needs to be done in the planning stages. Typically, we just our own business did about a $4.5 million unit at Mooloolaba, right on the water. We had, second story, reflections from the water, big open windows, and I'm talking about 15 to 20 metres wide frontage. They ran the sheets the wrong way. They ran the sheets across the light, not into the light. Became an absolute nightmare. Even level 5 finishers sprayed on couldn't fix it. One of the things I would say is if you've got glancing light and you notice that when you're on a job, then obviously you need to minimise the amount of patching that you can do, or you need to make sure you undercoat appropriately to hide those patches and make that sort of work for you. So inspecting paint work. So obviously the most common defect is runs. Okay, and why do they happen? Basically it's a downward force when you either put too much product on. You can use, they're overly thin, sometimes they can over thin them. And the object was too cold to be painted in the first place, and so you're not getting a curing time or a curing effect. Sagging and curtaining, well, curtaining basically is just a long, wide run, and that can happen when you're cutting in and you're using. I saw a job only yesterday that it curtained, and they were putting acrylic enamel on in a bakery, and they'd put it on too heavy when they cut in, and it had a curtain all the way along, about 3 metres long. So it happens easily, and so product comes into play, and the skill in using those products can happen. Wrinkling, not allowing undercoats to dry properly, is one of the causes of that. applying paint on a hot surface. So if you're doing weatherboards and you're doing it in the sun, then maybe you should be in the shaded side. Basically exposing the uncured paint to water or high humidity, so rain or wet surfaces. Bare or starved paint areas, you can see here, poor hiding, no primer or sealer. And we'll talk about proper sealers, but basically what we find in the industry is that, if pricing's tough, we thin, you'll see sealers thin down by 20 to 25% with water. They're sprayed on at a light misty coat. Let me tell you, if you were using the Dulux trade sealer, it should be on at 85 microns. What the idea of putting that thick sealer coat is, it gives you an even substrate. I was on a job this morning. They were priming new weatherboards with one of the new Dulux primers. Onto the weatherboard, 100 microns. That's a thick coat. That's not thin coat just to soak in. That's giving you a film build. Low quality products have fillers in them rather than high quality binders and titanium dioxide. So you can see how they'll do it. Also the base that it comes from can have an effect. I've all heard the saying, I owned paint shop so I know what it was like. Oh, that paint's rubbish, it didn't cover. But sometimes it's to do with the particular tinted undercoat, sometimes it's to do with the colour itself. Dirt or other foreign bodies, just lack of housekeeping, cleaning the surface, those types of things. Wind, gusts, whatever can happen, and you can get it in the final film, or in any of the films really. But basically, it's just a housekeeping issue. Irregular coarse brush and roller marks. Using the incorrect roller. Again, I've seen that plenty of times. Acrylic enamel on this particular bakery that I looked at yesterday, they used an 11mm nap to put acrylic enamel on. Anyone who's ever used that, no wonder they had 55 defects in runs. And those types of things. Lower quality tools, lower grades of paint. So the binders are not as good, not holding it together. On those pictures, that door on the top right-hand side, basically lack of skill in using acrylic enamel. Painters were used to using oil-based enamel. Absolute mess. Doesn't show it there, unfortunately, but it was. Here's a classic example of spray painting defects. As you can see, up in the top left-hand side, it's coming out a fair way into that particular frame. Again, possible pressure blowout. The tape wasn't there. It's been outside possibly a few days. They've come in, hit it with the spray gun too close, blown it out and covered the area that they shouldn't have been covering. Just poor operator technique. Or, the only thing I can say is when things like that happen, the best thing to do is clean it up straight away. And they're often left, I'll get that in touch-ups. It doesn't happen, and it's a reflection of the trade quality. Blistering, well, blistering is a bit of an anomaly. It says poor preparation, but, you can have finite microscopic cracks in old enamel. You put an acrylic over it if it's been damp. It'll lock it in, and then you've got steam coming up and your blister will take it right back. Moisture is one of your big issues there. You've got to wonder whether it's a good idea to pressure wash a house down before you paint it. Might be better to do it the week before and leave it time to cure out and dry out. So they're the types of things that you need, but that's a very, very common occurrence. Sometimes, as I said, it can be poor preparation, but 9 times out of 10, it's unavoidable if you can't see it. Uniformity of gloss level, uneven spread rates, failure to properly prime a porous surface. And that's the case. And you often see that. If you're talking about, when you're talking on a wall, if you don't put 80 microns on in your sealer undercoat, then you're going to see a different sort of porosity between the paper face plaster and the joining compound. Any plasterers in the room? Okay, right. So with plastering, if you know anything about it, their joining compounds are different. They use a different joining compound if they're sanding it with a hand sander versus a machine sander. It's a much harder compound. So again, you're getting different porosities. The idea of your sealer undercoat is to give you an even surface. Failing that, you'll get unevenness and away you go. Okay, so here's a classic job. This is a job we inspected about a month ago. When you have a look at this was about a $5,000 repaint in Cooperoo. Basically, it's got a range of issues, and I'll see if I can get this thing going. We might get it working, we'll see. Okay, all right, you can see a little red dot. So you've got poor preparation, you've got starved paint areas around here, you've got no paint up in here, you've got no gapping along the tops here, you've got lumps and bumps everywhere, you know, in the system. You've got silicon paint sissing, this was silicon going up the wall, and really just an overall crappy job. Now for $5,000, I know that when we looked at that job, what they'd done was probably a $9,000 job. So it was clearly underquoted. So how did they underquote it? I'd say the painter had his salesman's hat on when he went in there, didn't check it out, didn't look at all the details, didn't look at all the problems, got onto the job and went, holy, we're not going to get this done. That's exactly what happened. So what happens is, what's the first thing we're going to cut that we can cut? Preparation. So preparation is cut, there's a lack of it, along with probably poor communication with the client to say, hey, you know, that silicon, what are you doing with that? Because obviously we can't paint it, and that should have been discussed at the job. So there's a whole host of issues just gone wrong right there and then. And I would say underquoting was the big issue in that one in the first place. That's since being rectified, and that painter's paying for another painter to go in and fix it. So on a $5,000 job, the repair is $4,000. There you go. So not a good option, hey? This is the same job, by the way. So again, you know, you've got paint going onto fixtures and fittings. You can see that particular surround would just lift off. You'd unscrew that little button on the bottom, which is, you know, got a thread on it, and you take that off, or you'd mask around it, but you wouldn't paint it like they've overpainted there. When you look at nails and screws, so you've got a situation, that wall, that's a toilet wall. That's where the original toilet holder was. That's underfilling. And you can see on the timber, I would say that it was the wrong filler used. On a flat horizontal surface, most likely you should have used a 2-pack filler. So that's just poor selection or skill. Mechanical and natural defects in timber surfaces. Again, at 1.5, if you can see them, it comes down to what your client likes. If they want to see those natural defects because they like the natural look of it, great. Other than that, you need to fill them. So under the rules and regulations, you've got a possible cause of durability. There is a standard, so if you look at exterior acrylics, there's a minimum standard of 3 years outside. Enamel, 2 years. When you look at exterior clear fillings, clear finishes, not recommended at all. Why aren't they recommended? They're talking about polyurethanes and stuff like that. If you've ever used, they'll go, oh yeah, but marine varnish is the exception. Marine varnish wasn't really all that much better either. If anyone had put marine varnishes on, generally 7 to 8 coats was the recommended level of marine varnishes. So 1 or 2 would break down in 12, 18 months, 2 years. They'd give it a sand and put another 2 or 3 coats on it. That's how it worked. One of the issues of, that's coming with durability is over-thinning and over-spreading a paint. Again, not putting what's called the right amount of paint on. And by the way, I will tell you right now, the right amount of paint is not 2 coats. All right? Contrary to everyone's belief. When you look at cracking and peeling, well, it's poor adhesion and poor preparation on that particular job there.